Hello everyone, I'm Falguni and welcome to today's webinar. So this session is part of our ongoing market intelligence series, and we are pleased to be hosting the third installment on how market intelligence can be effectively applied by tech marketers. So we are delighted to have Tim with us once again. As an independent consultant with the business research company, Tim brings deep expertise and practical perspective to this topic. So let's get started. Over to you, Tim.
Okay, thanks, Falguni. Hello, everybody. So this is the third webinar that I've given. The previous webinar was on the C-suite, essentially the executive level within technology organizations and how they use market intelligence. Today's webinar is going to focus on a specific department, essentially the marketing function within technology vendors. So I have a few thoughts and perspectives to share on that. So the first slide, we're going to talk about the marketing function in context. So if we go on to the next slide, essentially we're looking at the organization of a technology vendor. Now, obviously, appreciate that I've simplified this, but I think most technology vendors of a certain size will operate with these types of functions. So at the top, we have the executive leadership, the board, the C-suite, who are clearly making important decisions, running the company. But I think if you think about the various functions, they vary from very internal operational functions, essentially the back office. So that's where you've got things like the R&D department, which are incubating, developing new technologies that ultimately will be brought to market. You've got finance departments, legal compliance departments. So these types of functions perhaps naturally have a little bit less interest in need for market intelligence. But then you've got some functions that are areas like product development, operations, the technology department, the business development function. There's starting to be more relevance for market intelligence and consumption of market intelligence in those parts of the business. And then you've got what I would describe as the most client-facing departments and the revenue-generating departments as well, which would be customer experience, the sales function, and that can obviously include the channel to market as well, and then the marketing department. Now, I'm planning to do another webinar on sales and the value of market intelligence for the sales function, but today's is absolutely focused on the marketing department. And as you can see, it very much really has a direct line straight into the board and the executive management of technology vendors. And in many ways, I would say, if you think about the key buyers of market intelligence within tech vendors, it's areas like analyst relations, market intelligence, marketing, product management. And I would say, based on my experience of speaking to tech vendors and buyers of technology market intelligence, marketing really is one of those key functions that actually really relies on analyst houses to provide it with good quality insight in the form of qualitative and quantitative research. So that's where it sits. And in many ways, I talked last time about the C-suite and their use of market intelligence. But in many ways, the C-suite is normally fed intelligence from beneath it within the firm. So a lot of the executive leadership perhaps don't have the time to reach out directly, especially in the bigger companies. They don't have the time to reach out directly to analyst houses. But the marketing function is very often the buyer of that market intelligence and often owns that relationship, depending on the size of the firm. Sometimes analyst relations actually sits within marketing. So a lot of the analyst relations people that I've spoken to in recent months, their bosses are heads of marketing, VPs of marketing. So it's a really key consumer of market intelligence within technology vendors. So if we go on to the next slide, this is just looking at some of the activities that happen in within technology vendors. And I think that the really important thing to make here, I used this slide in my previous presentation relating to the C-suite, which obviously has that helicopter view of what's going on within a vendor. But I think the important point to make here is that half of these activities have a marketing slant to them. If you think about the activities, they range from tactics to strategy, and they range from sort of back office stuff to front office functions. But as you can see, you've got a lot of these areas the marketing department's very, very heavily involved in. Clearly, marketing campaign development is a marketing function. We'll talk a little bit about that further down the line. But pricing is an absolutely key part of marketing. I've got a slide on the 5 Ps of marketing, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, but I thought that was a relevant template to talk about some of the uses of market intelligence within a tech vendor. So pricing is absolutely dictated by the marketing department in conjunction with sales and the C-suite leadership. But then you've got go-to-market strategies. How are we going to bring our product to market? What's our channel to market? What's our messaging? What's our timing? Which geographies are we going to play in? And that's obviously done in conjunction with the sales team. But then partnerships, alliances as well. It's such an important part of the technology industry is bringing these products to market and the various distribution channels, whether that be direct, but normally most tech firms are going through distribution models. So that could be tier 2 distribution through distributors and then value-added resellers, or a one-tier distribution model, or through managed services providers, or increasingly things like Amazon Marketplace are an important channel to market. So the marketing department is very heavily involved in that distribution element. Then you've got competitive positioning. So clearly these technology vendors, they're not operating in monopolies. They've got competitors. They have to react to those competitors. They have to think about competitors. And competitive positioning, again, is very central to the marketing department's function. And then you've got the really interesting area of market entry and market expansion. And in many cases, these markets, it could be taking existing products into new geographies or new vertical markets, for example, or it absolutely could be launching entirely new products and taking those to market. And this is something that a lot of thought needs to go into, a lot of stress testing of the timing, conversations internally, making sure that operationally everything is in place for market launch. Again, this is such a key part of a business's strategy, and the marketing department is absolutely central to that. So that's just to summarize of so many of these activities that we've been discussing, and we will continue to discuss in these webinars. As I said, half of these marketing is front and center of those activities. So if we go on to the next slide. I just wanted to talk through the role of the tech vendor's marketing function. As I said, I've used the 5 Ps of marketing to do this, to almost form a template. But as you can see, there's quite a lot to this, and quite a lot for the marketing folk to really think through. So now some of these things then they're doing in conjunction with other elements of the business, but some of them they absolutely own themselves. So from a product point of view, I think product development often in most cases it's a separate function, but there's really close overlap with the marketing department. So obviously, if you think back to the slide 2 previously, there are R&D departments. There's technologies being incubated in laboratories, ready to be taken out to market. But those products need to be need to be essentially developed. They need to be made ready within product development function, and then they need to be marketed. So how can we sort of maximize the opportunities, the revenues, the success of these products? And I think marketing really is interested in product development, and that's such a central part of what they're doing. The other thing the marketing department absolutely needs to do is to ensure that the product is sort of fits the market. So that could absolutely be the buyers. Is there interest in the product from buyers in the tech space? A lot of the times this interest needs to be generated, because a lot of times buyers they're not actually aware of the potential of technology. So because things are moving very quickly, the 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 marketing department needs to understand where there's actually a market fit. So that could be through surveys, that could be through workshops, that could be through getting feedback from sales departments, customer facing departments. It could be getting feedback through the channel. But essentially, the question the marketing department needs to know is, does our product have is there a market for our products? And that absolutely is an important part of, using third parties for market intelligence is a really important part of that. But then there's the go-to-market strategy. So how are we actually going to take our product to market? What's the channel? How will we position it? How will we pitch it? These kinds of elements are part of a go-to-market plan and strategy. So I think there's three elements that are product related that are very much part of the thought process for a tech marketer. But then there's the place. So as I said, for standard technology firms, I think in many cases 80 to 90% of the product is going through the channel. But those distribution channels absolutely need to be fostered, and they need to be developed. And it may be that entering entirely new markets involves finding new distribution channel partners as well. I've spoken to a large tech vendor recently who's absolutely trying to expand their channel to market, and they're using channel to market intelligence. They want to understand the composition of the distributors, the resellers, the size of those organizations, their footprints. So from a marketing point of view, as part of that go-to-market strategy, they've got to absolutely think about distribution. They also need to think about locations. That could be for consumer technologies. That could obviously clearly be stores, but it could also extend out into things like events. The marketing department is generally responsible for those stands that we see in big events such as Mobile World Congress or RSA Security. These are big technology vendor events. There's a series of them. I'm sure everyone here has contacts on LinkedIn who are going to these events, and the marketing department needs to understand those events. They need to understand who's going to be there, what the buyer groups might be, in order to which competitors will be there, but absolutely in order to showcase the best of their technologies. So this placing of the product is absolutely key, and things can move very quickly in the technology sector. So that's clearly front of mind. But then there's the people element. So if I sort of jump to the second bullet under people, I think training those partners up on the messaging, the value in the products, because you're absolutely relying on third parties to get your product to market. So you have to train those partners on the messaging, the value in the product, the functionality. This might perhaps a little bit more technical, but there might be some element of branding and positioning, the technical accreditations, things like that. That's key. But then there's also the messaging internally. So the staff messaging. Are the staff members actually familiar with the new products and the new functionality, the value in the products? has that been conveyed properly? And as I said, like with the technology market moving quickly, things can change. This obviously needs to be updated. There's the competitor element, which I've talked about before, and that messaging has to be ongoing and in the right format to be consumed, because we all know there's so much information out there at the moment. But then another important people element is very much understanding the consumers of the technology. And by consumers, that's a slightly loose language. By consumers, I actually mean who's actually buying and using the technology. So that could be consumers themselves, but also businesses. So there's B2B market, B2B, business to business, and then business to consumer as well. So a lot of marketing departments will look at market intelligence to help them actually decipher the sort of decipher the end user buyers, define them, give some insight into their needs, because this then ultimately can translate into the correct messaging and the correct positioning of the products to actually generate the demand, generate the revenues, and obviously build the market share. So that's an important part of the people side. Pricing is clearly really key. Depends very much on the technology, but pricing, getting the pricing right. Obviously, there's a competitor element to that. So reacting, I've got a case study later on. So I've spoken to 3 vendors recently. I've spoken to heads of marketing in 3 vendors recently, and I've got quite an interesting insight into the importance of pricing and reacting to pricing. And that is absolutely something where tech vendors need third-party support from market intelligence providers to understand their competitors' pricing and then react to that. But there also needs to be thought given to licensing of products, particularly software, subscription models, some flexibility around that. This is done probably slightly more in conjunction with the sales and heads of sales, but that pricing, the licensing, subscription messaging, the way that the technology is actually consumed by the end user, absolutely is part of the marketing function. And then at the appropriate time, there may be the need for some discounting. This is obviously an important strategy that can help to generate sort of revenues at key times of the year, or it could be used in relation to the product life cycle. So every technology is going to have a certain lifespan because the technology market is moving so quickly. So discounting could be a very sensible strategy to maximize revenues from a product release, which is about to become moribund, essentially. So again, in conjunction with sales, and we'll get into this a bit more when we do the next webinar on sales next month, but discounting absolutely falls under the purview of the marketing department. And then I think the final point is a really important one, which is promotion of the technology and promotion of the products. One thing that's quite interesting about the marketing function in technology vendors is that the brand and the communications is often sunk with marketing at the same time. So branding around the product, branding around the vendor, that's really key. I'm going to talk a little bit about messaging and the value that market intelligence providers can help with messaging shortly. You've then got sort of traditional marketing functions that perhaps predate not so much the internet, but just how are we advertising our products in certain channels compared to sort of very digital marketing. So online presence, these kinds of functions. So there needs to be that distinction between the messaging and the the promotion of the particular product based on traditional versus digital marketing channels. So that's just an overview of all the types of things that a marketer might have to be thinking about. If we move on to the next slide, it's an important slide that talks about some of the things that business research can help with. And what we've done with this slide is to actually convert it again into its relevance to the marketing department. So of those seven areas, and I've used this slide in previous webinars, I would say only the evaluation of investments, improvement of operations aren't really directly related to marketing, but the other five absolutely all are. So identifying markets, particularly new markets for new market entry, is definitely something that marketers want to do. They want information that can help them optimize their products. And that could be feedback, particularly on customer demands. It could be feedback from competitors. It could be feedback on technology capabilities as they emerge in the market. So this type of intelligence is absolutely key. As I said, understanding their target customer base, their wants and needs, their budgets to actually invest in new technologies. This is all extremely important. And then a really important area that analyst houses can help with is spotting trends. The value of a good analyst is somebody that is out there and is speaking to clients, speaking to other vendors, as essentially he or she has their finger on the pulse of what is coming up in the market, what is being incubated in the labs, how quickly could new products come to market, how quickly could things change. So that ability to spot the trends, decipher where things are heading is definitely very important value of business research. And then, as I said, a market is comprised of typically comprised of a number of vendors. Some may be more successful than others. Clearly, they may be playing in different niches, but that understanding of competitors, it's quite difficult for a vendor to do that. So they need good quality third-party insights that can help them with their competitors' activities, to help them, understand their competitors' activities. And they might need that intelligence very quickly because things can move quite quickly and they could be caught off guard. There could be a change in the market, and it could actually shift the market quite quickly. So I think in terms of the value of business research, so much of it has relevance to the marketing department, and I think that's an important area to stress. So that's just an initial intro. I think before we move on, the next section is to go into a little bit more detail around some specific uses, but obviously happy to take any questions at this stage. We've got another session for questions at the end. So,
Hello, Tim. I have a question.
hi.
Yeah, what's the best way to respond when competitor moves create pressure on positioning or pricing?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it ties into those points about pricing and how that can shift the market quite quickly. I think the first and foremost, competitor intelligence is really valuable here. So just understanding the competitors' activities, trying to understand why they've actually made that change with pricing. I think that's really key. I think the second point to make, though, is that a tech vendor, that they need to think about their own pricing strategies, but it's in relation to the product, the quality of the product and the service that they're offering. So if the competitors, if the pressure is being placed on them in terms of lowering prices, that may be in relation to a poorer quality product that the competitor is offering. So they also might need to think about, new products launches, things like that. So uh, it obviously needs a little bit. It obviously needs a little bit of context, but I think just that the competitor intelligence is the starting point, and then I think it's trying to look at things in relation to um, their own product versus the competitor's products, and it may be they need to react, but in many cases it may be they need to hold firm with their own pricing and tie it into their own product launches and things.
Yes, thank you, Tim.
Okay. Okay. So as I said, we've got a Q&A at the end as well. So yeah, so this section is just looking at the use of intelligence and how it aids vendor marketing. So I've got three case studies here. The first case study is an interesting one. So this is a vendor that I spoke to a couple of months ago, and they're an IoT vendor. And the lady I spoke to there talked me through how she uses market intelligence and the value that she gains from market intelligence. I want to get this detail because a key thing for her was understanding the difference across sectors. So with the Internet of Things, there's different usage cases for IoT within different sectors. And a key thing for this vendor was helping them get the right notes and the right messaging in their marketing campaigns. So they were using the market intelligence that they gained from the analyst house to make sure they had they had the right language, and the language was also on point with what's happening now and what new technologies were coming out. So that's a really key thing. A second point was just this understanding of the technology trends. So the vendor has its own thoughts around its own direction, but it absolutely needs the analyst house to provide some insight into the actual technology trends that are occurring in the market. So it's that thought leadership role that an analyst house can play is key. Another thing is competitor insights. So we talked a little bit about the reaction to competitor activity as being very important. So that competitor intelligence can be really key. But it's actually a little bit more than that in the marketing department. So a lot of technology vendors rely on reports from analyst houses that position them in a certain way. And they can use, if the analyst house has good credibility, they can use that collateral to position their products and services. A good example here might be the Gartner Magic Quadrant, which places technology vendors in terms of their performance and rates them alongside one another. But its appearance in the competitor analysis report is actually really key. It can help to get more, be shortlisted more. So what they're ultimately looking for, the vendor, they want to get on requests for proposals, requests for information from buyers. So if that marketing, the success of their marketing is whether they can get on more RFPs, RFIs, and good quality competitor intelligence from an analyst house can absolutely help them do that. As I mentioned before, when we talked about the pricing, this exactly as the question was previously, where this vendor had a situation where they were losing business because of pricing. So they absolutely need some competitor intelligence to help strengthen their position, and they did that through analyst houses. So obviously, analyst houses can go to they've got a neutral position in the market. They can have some subtle, intelligent conversations, and then they can potentially feed that back to technology vendors and help them secure and win business. And then the other thing that this vendor really uses market intelligence for is to generate demand. Analyst houses may have their own network of buyers and purchasers, and they can really help to widen vendor sales opportunities. A lot of the time, this is done through joint webinars. So you could have a situation where there's a technology topic, the vendor wants to talk about the technology topic, and then they use the expert from the business research company or another analyst house to talk about that trend in the market. And that actually gives real proper validation to the market and the direction it's taking. So there's this ability to use intelligence to help generate demands, and that's very important. So that's just an initial insight into how vendors are using market intelligence within their marketing departments. If we go on to the next slide, I just tried to summarize on the next slide what I thought were the really key uses of market intelligence for the marketing department. Now, I've touched on 3 or 4 of these already, so I won't talk so much around those. So, as I said, competitive positioning and analysis, I would think of that both internally, so very much we're working on our strategy, how do we position ourselves against a particular competitor, how do we react to a competitor's activities, but it's also this external function. So it's using market intelligence to promote the vendor. How well are we performing against a particular competitor? Then there's this targeted demand generation. So really trying to think through with demands, how we can generate demands, how we can use maybe thought leadership from analyst houses. Could we use white papers and things like that? Can we create awareness? How can we improve the interest and trust in our products or services? And analyst houses absolutely can help do that. And then the third key point is just this market messaging. I suppose I'm sure everyone on this call has been aware of changing vernacular, changing language around technology. Now these things for consumers or people out on the streets, this can be a slow change and a subtle change, but this messaging and positioning is absolutely needs to happen quite quickly within the technology vendors themselves. And a lot of vendors actually, they rely on analyst counsel. They rely on that ability, that strength of relationship to speak to analysts and stress test their messaging. Are we getting the messaging right? Will this resonate essentially with our end user audience? So I think that's really, really key. And then the 2 points on the left of the slide, I haven't spoken quite so much about. I think product market fit, I touched on very briefly. Essentially it's very, very simple. Is there a market for the product? Is there a fit for the product? Can we speak to the potential buyers of the product and understand what they're looking for, what they need? Because the last thing we want to happen is to have some really great, there's plenty of examples of really great technology that hasn't actually made it through to the buyers and the end users, and second or vendors with second or third best technologies, but really strong marketing departments who get the messages right, know how to place their products, know how to distribute their products, know how to connect with the buyers. They're the ones that can actually be the most successful. So I think product market fit, I think you have to think of this as different types of markets ultimately. So you need to understand perhaps some cultural differences, geographical differences in the potential demand for products, but also the differences by sector. We talked a little bit on the previous slide with the IoT case study, how that vendor wanted to understand the different demand for their products across verticals. There's different demand by size bands as well. So it's actually the marketing department needs to define those niches that they can then position the products in, and that's the final point around market segmentation. So for me, I think this is absolutely a key part of what a market intelligence provider can do. They can segment and define those markets. they can define the target audience, and they can really help the marketing department with that segmentation, and then some tailored delivery, some tailored positioning of those products to bring them to market. And also, we'll come on to this very, very soon. The sort of size and essentially the size and the growth of the market of those various niches is absolutely key. And there really needs to be a thought about how that product is actually where we are in the product life cycle. Are we in that early adopter phase? Are we in the early majority, the late majority? Probably should have, thinking about it now, probably should have had a slide on that. But absolutely, if you think about the takeoff of a product, it needs the vendor really needs to understand and capture that moment when a market really does take off. Because if they're too late to market, they'll potentially miss out on a fantastic opportunity. So that's some of the key uses of market intelligence. On the next slide, I've got a nice case study around how market intelligence is used by a vendor. This is a cybersecurity vendor to drive its product direction and distribution. And I spoke to the lady at this vendor, and she was explaining to me how there's really 5 areas where market intelligence adds a huge amount of value. So some of these we've touched on already. In fact, most of them we have, but it just consolidates the importance of the intelligence. So this vendor wants to understand how the competitors are ranking. They want to look at opportunity. And they, as I said, they use that competitor intelligence both externally. So to say that they're performing better than another vendor in a certain niche or in a certain geography, but they also use it internally. It's literally used in the boardroom as a strategy, as a defensive strategy, but perhaps as an offensive strategy. Why don't we do something that gives us a first mover advantage? So competitive intelligence is key. But from product decisions, they're absolutely all about looking for white new space, brand new territory to go into, whether that's geographies or new markets or new sectors or new channels to market. And this is actually tied into their product decisions, also around their market entry. So getting the timing for market entry right. Don't want to enter a market with a big fanfare if the market's in too formative a stage. Equally, don't want to enter a market too late. And then they need to get the keywords for campaigns right. So they need to speak to analysts around that. As I've talked a little bit about distribution, the vendor absolutely needs a provider that can help them understand the value-added resellers and the distributors to partner with. So that's key. And they need to get their sort of messaging right as well. So they need to understand the target audience and what they care about. And then they obviously can craft messages accordingly in their marketing campaigns. So this could just be from analysts being able to pick up on the new technologies that are coming out and how they're being discussed within the laboratories, but also thinking about brand new messaging, but then perhaps stress testing with clients or potential clients in workshops, perhaps running surveys of IT decision makers around how they might rate particular messaging. This is key. And then the final thing is absolutely a key role of the marketing function is this market segmentation. So need to think through the various segments, the various buyer groups, the various geographical segments, the various target personas as well. So who's going to be ultimately buying this? And I think when that market segmentation is coupled with quite strong insight into size of the market and the growth of the market, as well as the share in the market, I think that really adds quite a lot of value. So if we move on to the next slide, I just wanted to highlight some content types that really can enhance the marketing department. So in the excuse me, in the top left-hand corner, market sizes and forecasts, as I just touched on. That's absolutely central. Excuse me. Then in the top right, we talked about this already. So the competitor intelligence, I would say those two are really central. Then you've got this ability to identify technology trends, what's coming up. So I think market trend identification is an area where an analyst house really can add value. There's a lot of talk about technologies, but it's really trying to sort of decipher how things are moving, how quickly things will move in the market. That analysts would understand the various technology vendors that are playing in the market, how they're all competing against one another, what their release plans are, try to get a sense for the timing. Is it a late 2026? Is it the first half of 2027? Are we talking about something in the 2030s? So it's just this knowledge of the technology trends is really key. And that comes from good quality market research. I think the other thing is buyer insights. So it's the surveying of the end user buyers. It's the conversations that the analyst is having with potential clients. It's the understanding of the pain points and then relaying that back to the vendor. Because the analysts are in a unique position. The vendors don't have that opportunity to speak to all these clients because they're obviously the clients are wary of the vendor, perhaps selling the sales pitch may be too strong and too heavy. So that buyer insight role that an analyst can play is really important. Then you've got the channel analysis, the channel to market, the distribution model. I think good quality research on that, how the distribution models might work in different geographies is a really good example. Are there any distributors that are really strong in particular verticals? Are there any that are strong in the within large customers or smaller customers? So that channel to market analysis is key. And then the final thing is analyst advisory, picking of the brains of the analysts. There's some real value there if the vendor can pick up the phone, book in an hour with the analysts, just pick their brains. I think that's really good, really useful for them. So that was just some of the content types, and then I just wanted to. The penultimate slide is the next one, and that's just to validate the use of market intelligence within a particular vendor again. So this is another vendor that I've spoken to. This one operates an IT management platform that monitors, manages, and secures endpoints. But their use of market intelligence was absolutely to help them with their go-to-market strategy. They were actually looking to take their product in a slightly different direction in terms of channel to market. So they wanted to understand the managed services provider space, and they used third-party insight to do that. So obviously thinking of partnering with large systems integrators, getting their product built into some of those solutions. It's a slightly different go-to-market approach compared to, say, a distribution model going through tier 1 and tier 2 providers. But as I mentioned previously, this vendor absolutely uses analyst house partners for counsel. So they want that they sign up for analyst advisory services, and then they can get feedback to validate or refute their go-to-market. I think we perhaps underestimate how there may be some politics involved in here within technology vendors. There's obviously different personalities pulling the strategy and direction of the company in different directions, and sometimes analysts can even be used politically to actually help with to help refute or validate a particular go-to-market approach. Then the other thing is obviously a good analyst is essentially on the money with what's happening, what's coming up, how the direction that a market might be taking. They've 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 spent a lot of time researching the market, and they can actually get some really good thoughts and ideas, and they can actually help transform a company. It's easy for marketing folk potentially to be just coming up with the same ideas or regurgitating the same ideas, and actually an outside perspective can be really healthy, stimulate new thoughts, new ideas, a change of direction, and there's real value there from an analyst house to do that. And then the final thing is that market intelligence really can influence end users. So end users, they may not they may not actually rely on. I mean, some like Gartner are actually, obviously they have they have advisory services for end customers, but I think just the influence that good analysts collateral, good analyst reports can help to make is actually, don't underestimate that. Things like white papers, for example, thought leadership pieces, these can be really, really useful. And some of that collateral can actually be used by vendor to enhance their sales. So that influence end user piece is a really important point too. Okay, so I have one more slide, and that really essentially talks about the marketing, completes the picture from the marketing function. But I just think it's just important to sort of tie that all back with the type of attributes that I would be looking for in a market intelligence provider. I think in the tech sector, things move really quickly, as I've mentioned 2 or 3 times. And I think if the analyst house can identify those emerging trends, I think that's really really helpful. Identify and articulate them, and I think a big part of that is the timing as well. Just trying to understand how these technologies will actually be rolled out and when they're going to be ready, and when they'll be coming to market. I think that's really key. I think it's also important that the analyst is visible. I think it's always good to work with analysts that have a decent market presence. That could be on social media, that could be on quotations in the press, in the media, but just generally, I think as well, especially in the tech sector where because markets change quite frequently, it's that ability to be reacting to the market changes, I think is very, very important. And I think a decent cadence of publication is also key. I think you also need analyst houses that have decent authority. You can rely on what they're saying. They have good methodologies, and then they can, obviously that authority helps them define market trends, and even shape the narrative and potentially the terminology. I can't think of a specific example, but I'm absolutely convinced that a lot of these analysts that are certainly on the nub with what's coming up in terms of emerging technologies are absolutely helping vendors shape their narratives and terminology. And some of the terminology that we're using today would absolutely have been incubated by analysts back in the day. So I think data sets are really, really key. We talked a little bit about, from a marketing perspective, how data sets need to do really good quality segmentation. So I think you need that clarity of taxonomy is key, especially in the tech sector, and the taxonomy needs to be relevant. And then I think you need that ability to look across markets as well, which is really key, because I think a lot of this it's based around which some important decisions are made. So if you think about that initial slide, the marketing department needs to go to the C-suite because they need to make decisions around market entry, and actually understanding the relative size of markets and their potential for growth is absolutely key. And that's where the comprehensive data sets come in really helpful. I think a final point is around using analysts as a forum builder. So I think good analyst houses are able to get people in a room together, and then they can share information and collaborate. And I think that can really help vendors in their size, sorry, in their market performance, and just picking up on what's important and what's important going forward. And then the final point is that analyst houses can really provide insight into customers in a way that vendors themselves cannot, because the vendors naturally, as I said before, are trying to sell something to the customers. I think the customers can have some quite open and frank conversations with analyst houses. That could be in the form of surveys, one-on-one discussions, workshops, those types of things. But you can get some really credible insights from that pulse of the customer potential. So that was just as a form of summary, just some of the things I would be thinking about if I was looking to select a market intelligence provider, particularly one that provided some insight into some value for marketing folk within technology vendors. That completes the slides. We do have a little bit of time for Q&A. If anyone has any questions, I'll try and answer them.
Hi, Tim.
Hi, Tim.
Hi.
Yeah, I have a question. How do we know when market intelligence is outdated or no longer relevant?
Okay. So I think in the tech sector, I think obviously data publication is absolutely key. So I wouldn't be relying on anything that's been published 3 years ago, for example. But I'd also be slightly hesitant of something that's published a year ago from a tech point of view, because obviously we live in a world where the news is changing very quickly, and you're getting quite big paradigm shifts as well. But I think the key thing that I would be looking for would be around taxonomy. I think the taxonomy absolutely has to be relevant. So you don't want outdated terminology, because that's a sign that it's a bit of market intelligence that's been running for several years and it's just being updated. So I think they would be the things that I would be looking for to try and pick out if something is no longer relevant.
Thank you.
Hi, Tim.
Hi.
So my question is, what happens when different sources of market intelligence contradict each other?
Okay. So I think that can be healthy, but at the same time, it needs to be scrutinized. So I think if everybody's saying exactly the same thing, that would sometimes raise some red flags for me. So I think there's some slight differences in direction. As long as the methodology is clear, I think that's okay. I think sometimes there's value in sort of triangulating with market intelligence. So I think having 2 or 3 different sources is good, and then you can then use those different sources, and perhaps then as a tech vendor you can actually apply your own thought process to it as well. But I think the key thing for me is I'd be thinking about the methodology. So I'd want to understand. I'd really want to understand how the analyst house has put that methodology together, and I would be really stress testing that with the analyst house, because yeah, if you're not getting a good response back, then I would be a little bit wary that there might be it might have been done a little bit hastily, or there might have been some plagiarism. You don't want that, clearly. So I think that would be what I'd be doing if I was a buyer of the market intelligence.
Thank you, Tim. That makes sense.
Do we have any more questions? Okay, all right. It looks like there are no further questions, so we'll go ahead and wrap up here. Thank you, Tim, for the presentation and insights, and thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. So before we close, just a quick note. On 21st April, we'll be hosting another webinar focused on Sysmex dementia and Alzheimer's disease diagnostic, which will be presented by our healthcare expert, Ravi Kiran. And we have one more webinar coming up on market intelligence for sales teams in the tech sector, presented by Tim in the month of May. So please keep an eye on your inbox for the invitation. We would be glad to have you join us. So thank you once again and have a great day ahead.
Thank you.